get the vibration. Won't do you no good. It won't do you no good. And you better start rolling when you hear the man calling. It won't do you no good. It won't do you no good. No, we don't mind if you don't mind. 'Cause I'll never mind. Let the feeling come take you. It won't do you no good. It won't do you no good. And you know I got fever. So when you hit me right, you know you might as well. It won't do you no good.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Instant Release, and today we're going to talk about the Nikon Z6. I've already tried to make this video 3 times, so it's not easy to make a video about that camera for a number of reasons, but the most important reason I would think is the reputation of that camera. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So let's start with the specs of the Z6 and the context of its release. The Z6 was released in 2018. It's a full-frame mirrorless camera with a Z-mount released by Nikon. It has been released, so as I said, in 2018, and at this time was really weird moment for mirrorless cameras. So the history of the Z6 is actually, pretty interesting, because Nikon started to work on the Z-mount in about 2015 or so, and at this moment in 2015, the mirrorless full-frame, landscape was really only Sony at this point. They had the A7 and the A7 II and the A7R, but I think there was the A7S at this point already. But those cameras weren't really challenging Nikon and Canon DSLRs, and Sony kept it that way until the end of 2016, pretty much. They had a better system, but they kept it and they worked on it a little bit more to make it more mature, better performing, whatever, you name it. And Sony and Nikon and Canon really thought they had time, so they thought they were starting early in 2015, 16 to work on their next, mirrorless full-frame cameras. And it turns out that they were actually late to the party, because in 2017 Sony released the A9 and the A7R III, which was really a shock to the industry, because they were the first cameras where professionals looked at them and said, okay, this is actually a legit camera. I can see myself switch from a DSLR to a camera like this. And so they end up being a little bit scared, and they wanted to get their mirrorless cameras out as fast as possible, and that's what happened. They rushed their cameras, and both Nikon and Canon did that. Canon did that with the EOS R, and Nikon did that with the Z6 and Z7. Those cameras were rushed, and the firmware on those cameras on release was completely unfinished, with huge performance issues. And so, well, in 2018, when they released those cameras, it was quite a big blow to the reputation of both Nikon and Canon. Canon a bit less than Nikon, but there was a huge set of expectations around the Z6 and Z7 cameras, and those expectations were clearly not filled. So, the reputation of the Z6, the Z7, and Nikon as a brand really took a dip, and they are still trying to go up the slope nowadays, but it's hard for them. So, when it comes to the specifications of the Z6, it's very close to that's pretty funny. It's very close to what Sony would release a few months earlier with the A7 III. So you have a 24 megapixel full-frame BSI CMOS sensor. You have around 10 frames per second. We're going to talk about the burst rates in a minute. You have 4K 30 video. In the Z6, it's uncropped. There's a little crop in the A7 III, and that's the bulk of the specs. Then you have other things like external video and the format of cards being used. That was actually the biggest, one of the biggest, besides the autofocus performance, which sucked on release. But this one, the card format used, was actually one of the biggest point of contention about the Z6 when it was released, because it's using a single CF Express Type B card slot instead of the dual SD slots that the A7 III had. So there was a lot of debate on, is it worth to go with those newer cards if that means that you only have one of them? Those cards do not make any sense for a camera in this budget, yada yada yada. You get the idea of the kind of debate that is sparkled across the camera community. And, this is the situation we're at. We have a camera that has single card slot, but that card is pretty damn fast compared to SD cards. So that's about it. I said that for video it was able to do 8-bit video internally and also 10-bit video externally, and with a firmware upgrade you would have to pay $200 to Nikon. You could actually record 12-bit ProRes RAW. We're going to talk about this more in the video aspect of things of this camera, but this was like the major difference with the A7 III, because otherwise those cameras were really, really similar, on the spec sheet at least. For the performance and autofocus accuracy and stuff, it wasn't really the same camera at all. Okay, so now let's really get into the camera itself. What about the ergonomics, body design, handling, whatever? So when it comes to body design and ergonomics, I wouldn't say that I'm lost with the Z6, because I've used a lot of Nikon D8 DSLRs in the past, but I wouldn't say that this is like perfect layout either. There is very little custom buttons that you can do. There is only the front two ones. You have in stills mode you can change the function of the movie record button on top. You can put a function to that, but honestly it's not like it's really customizable camera like a Sony A7 III would be, for example. So it's really a matter of, is the layout okay for you as it is? And to me it is, because as I said, I've used Nikon cameras in the past, so that's pretty typical for me to have this kind of layout. But for someone coming from Canon or Sony or Fujifilm, it would be a little bit weird, for sure. Myself coming from Fujifilm X-H1, which was my main camera before the Z6, it was like there was some annoying things that I could go over, but overall it wasn't like a bad experience. The grip is noticeably deeper than the one on the A7 III, but both have the same problem where, you have your pinky that hangs at the bottom of the camera. I fixed that problem on the Z6 by adding a small rig plate to it, so that's one thing. But yeah, it's a very good grip when it comes to shape and design and how comfortable it is, but unless you add that plate, if you have big hands like mine, you will have problems with, generally having comfortable grip and accessing the buttons in the back at the same time. I could fit all my fingers on the grip, but if I do so, my thumb is considerably higher in the back, and so it's much harder for me to access the AF on button, for example. So there's always like compromises to do. But overall, I would say that out of the 3 cameras that were released in 2018, like the EOS R, the Z6, and the A7 III, I would say that the Z6 is by far the best camera when it comes to ergonomics to me. The joystick placement is very good. The buttons in the back are pretty much here for what you want them to do. The dials are really nice, and having a big AF on button, which is also like a soft button, it's not like a clicky button like it was on the X-H1, which is not my preference at all. That's actually a good thing. So body design and ergonomics to me, it's when it comes to handling, it's very nice. Now when it comes to displays, it's also very nice, because we have a 3.6nm TVF, so for me it wasn't really a departure or a change or anything like that, because the X-H1 had the same kind of AVF, but it's a clear upgrade compared to the A7 III, for example, which has a 2.36mm viewfinder, which is similar to what I have in my X-T2, for example, which is much older camera. It's very similar AVF to what you'd find in the original A7 from 2014, so it's like a lower spec AVF compared to what was in the A7R3, for example. So it's just lower end camera, and so it had lower end displays, but the Nikon Z6 didn't cheap out on those at all, even though it was released at the same price. So that was, kind of a nice thing to have to excuse us for our bad autofocus performance. That's how people took it back in 2018. Same goes for the back screen, by the way. On my X-H1, it was very much like the Sony's, like either just under a million dots or just over a million dots, so either 936K dots or 1.04 million dots or something like that. Like, it's not a bad screen per se, but it's not exactly high resolution. On the Z6 we have a 2.1 million dots screen, which is actually pretty well detailed, very well detailed, and has good contrast ratio. It goes pretty bright if you want to. Honestly, just a good back panel. The best back panel I've had on a camera to date, so honestly, really good on that front. The screen rotates up and down. It's just a tilt screen, so you don't have the side tilt I had in the X-H1. You don't have a way to see yourself. There's like some hacks for you to do that, but natively the camera can do at all. Like, you can't see yourself with the screen that the camera has. You can't have like articulation of the screen if you're shooting vertically. Those kind of things. It's fairly common with cameras like this. The A7 III is in the same situation, so it's not really a huge problem to me. One thing I should say though is that the screen being a little better when it comes to contrast ratios, being brighter and having better resolution, meant that the lack of vertical articulation that I had on the X-H1 and the X-T2 wasn't really that much of a problem at all, because I could see better the screen even if it was not articulated when I was doing low angle vertical shots. So that's, another positive, I guess. But that's about it when it comes to handling and ergonomics, in my opinion. I guess when it comes to body design, we could talk about the card slot. I would touch on that a little bit, but my opinion about that whole situation is that those cards are more reliable than SDs. So when it comes to reliability, how safe you are, how confident you are in your camera, to me it's about the same compared to a camera using dual SD slots. Of course, the best would be dual CF Express Type B, but the only camera that does that, to my knowledge, is Z9. Not about to buy Z9 right now. But yeah, I have no problem. I went from the XH1, which had two UHS-2 SD slots. By the way, my XT2 also has dual UHS-2 SD slots, and that's nice to have, of course, but having a single CF Express Type B allows me to have a faster card, and it's a much more reliable card than like standard SD cards, so I actually don't really mind it that much. Like, personally, I have stepped back a little bit out of, like paid gigs and stuff like that, simply because I have a full-time job now, so I only have the weekends to do that. So I can't really say using that camera professionally like hard, like you're using it almost every day or every week. I'm not using that camera every week for that kind of contracts or anything like that. I can't really say how much more reliable that card format is with my personal experience, but the many reports on these cards make it much more reliable than SDs, so I'm happy with that either way. Okay, so that's all about the body design, handling, body attributes of the camera, I would say. Let's talk about the image quality, and that's quite a bit of a big thing to go about, because when it comes to image quality, the Z6 is a big step forward compared to what I was used to before. So to put things in context, the cameras I was shooting before I got the Z6, first of all, there was the D700, which was my dedicated sports shooter and the camera that I shot for fun. And for everything else, I was using either the X-H1 or the X-T2, which both had the same sensor. So the D700 is a full frame 12 megapixel sensor from 2007 to 2008, so not really a modern sensor in any way, shape or form. And the X-T2 is about at the top of what you would expect of a APS-C sensor even today. It's a 24 megapixel sensor. When it comes to ISO, dynamic range and stuff like that, I had no problem with either of those cameras already. But the Z6 really provided much better experience when it comes to files and your versatility when it comes to post-treatment. On the Z6, when it comes to dynamic range, I could push the shadows much more without introducing nearly as much noise. I could bring back the highlights more as well, and the highlight roll-off, it was really smooth, while on the D700 and the XT2, XH1, the roll-off was generally pretty harsh, like with the circles, white circles that you see. On the Z6 is happening a lot less, so it's much more forgiving when it comes to actual processing of your files later, and this is something that I didn't think that I would need full frame or anything like that. I still consider that I don't. But having that extra performance, that extra versatility on my files actually was something that was beneficial more than what I thought it would be. And I'm really happy that I have a camera that can produce images that are that good. When it comes to ISO and noise and stuff like that, same kind of story. I do consider that the XT2, which has an ISO range from 200 to 12,800, is more than enough for what I do generally. But at the same time, the Z6 having from 100 to 51,200, and when it comes to usable images, up to about 25,600, obviously we'll have to use a little bit of noise reduction and stuff like that, but they are very usable images that I would be comfortable providing to a client. This is actually huge, and like that allows me to shoot in much darker conditions without really worrying about it. That allows me to use much slower lenses without worrying about it too much. On the XH1 and XT2, I was always obsessing about like fast lenses or like good lighting and stuff like that. On the Z6, not a problem at all. So actually, I'm pretty happy about that too. So when it comes to image quality, I have absolutely no complaints with the Z6, and I don't see, honestly, I don't see today where I would be able to improve on the Z6. Of course, there is always a resolution. I could get a 45 megapixel camera or 60 megapixel camera, but already 24 is more than enough for my needs. My sweet spot output resolution would be about 10 to 12 megapixels when it comes to delivering photos to clients and printing. And that's one of the reasons I was able to keep using my D700, which is only 12 megapixels, for sports shooting, for example, because that's basically the resolution I want to have as my output. But the major problem with those 12 megapixel cameras is that you can't have any cropping room, and with the 24 megapixel XT2 and XH1, I had a lot of cropping room with those 24 megapixels, and the same happens for the Z6, and I have much more cropping room than I actually need. So I don't think I need more at all. Any more cropping room than what the Z6 gives me would be like ludicrous, really, and I really don't think that I need something like Z7 or Z8. I'm really fine with 24 megapixels, and I don't want to take the hit on the file size. That's actually the biggest limitation for me when it comes to photos and stuff like that, is the file size, because my PC behind me is aging, and I do not have a NAS. I do not have like online storage and stuff like that. I have like those hard drive which I put my photos on for a backup, and that's it. So I do not have like a professional storage system. So yeah, file size is pretty important to me, and 24 megapixels is right where I would draw the line pretty much. So yeah, no issues about it either. So that was for the photo part, but now let's talk about the image quality of the video part, and this is I guess a little simpler to talk about. When it comes to, how does it compare to my previous cameras for video, which were the XH1 and the XT2? I would say the XH1 and the XT2 had a better looking video because they had f-log, which gave me more dynamic range and was a little sharper, I feel like. But at the same time, the XH1 and the XT2 had like crappy autofocus. I think they had more complaints for autofocus than anything else on this channel, because of the XH1 drifting away, because of the XT2 just focusing on the background and switching back to my face. Now with the Z6, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, and the camera pretty much focuses on my face without like twitching to the background or whatever. And that was part because the Z6, the XT2 and the X-H1 only have phase detect point in the center of the frame and not all across the frame, which a camera that has phase detect points all across the frame can follow you and not be confused with the background and stuff. A camera that has like contrast detection only on the sides will be confused, and this is what happened with the X-H1, what has stepping out of those phase detection points, which was definitely a problem to me. So video quality wise, internally in 8-bit with the flat profile with that I tweaked a little bit, not much problems honestly. The workflow is pretty equivalent to my XT2 and X-H1, and I would say the quality is pretty much the same as well, just with a less dynamic range and a little bit less noise as well. But when it comes to practicality, huge upgrade with the autofocus and face and eye tracking and stuff like that, so there's that. Now, if I want to have a better video camera, I can, technically, and I don't have to buy a new camera, I just have to buy a recorder and slap in the mini HDMI port on the side, because the Z6 is able to do 10-bit 422 with N-Log externally, which is actually very good video, and if I was using 10-bit, this is what I would do. I'm not using 10-bit at all, but if I want to have that upgrade in the future, that's a thing that the Z6 can do. So I'm not really interested in the raw video at all, so this is where I would stop probably. But know that the raw video stuff is also something that is on the Z6, line of capabilities with the firmware upgrade. Yeah, to me the Z6 is like everything I want for video and then some. IBIS in video works pretty okay. I tried to do like a vlogging style review. I didn't like really what I said doing this review, and there was still some autofocus problems. At one point, like there was touch to track in video, and at one point while holding the camera, I tapped the focus with my finger without without wanting it, and the whole thing was focused on the background for the entirety of the section because I couldn't see myself because of the lack of flip screen. So that basically meant that the whole thing was put in the trash. So still things to iron out, I guess. But video wise, no problem at all. No problem. It's a camera that works for me, and I don't need a super high quality for video, and especially for the stalking stuff and for like the small video project I would do otherwise. No problem either. It's a very good video camera to me. So it's about the same as the X-T2 and the X-H1, but with accurate autofocus this time, which is great. Okay, let's talk now about the performance of the Z6. So everything that's related to burst rates, autofocus, buffer health, stuff like that. So when it comes to burst rates, you have three settings. You have CL, CH, and CH extended. CL is adjustable from 1 to 5 frames per second depending on your needs. CH is fixed, it's 5.5 frames per second. In both CL and CH, you have the view from the blackout, like in the DSLR, and between each frame you will have the live view thing, like if you were not taking pictures and just looking through the EVF. So you have a low latency when it comes to what you see on the screen and what is really happening in real life. So if you want to track something, it's much more accurate with the CH and CL burst rate modes. Now the CH extended, this is where you're going to have much faster burst rate than 5.5 frames per second, but you will have the slideshow mode. The slideshow mode is really what you... when you're taking pictures, basically the previous frame is displayed in your viewfinder until the new one is taken. So you have a lot more latency, of course, and it changes with the the burst rate. The faster the burst rate, the lower the latency, pretty much. And you have two burst rates in this mode. You have one which is 9 frames per second if you shoot 14-bit files, and if you downgrade that to 12-bit files, you will be able to shoot 12 frames per second. I'm generally okay with 8 frames per second, so I'm generally just going into 14-bit files and shooting 9 frames per second, no problem with this. But if I do want to have like that faster burst rate and I want to have those 12 frames per second, the downgrade of image quality going from 14 to 12-bit honestly not a huge deal, especially for the type of photos that it is. You lose a bit of dynamic range, but honestly, it's not the end of the world, I would say. So I would definitely do that if you really want to use 12 frames per second. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Um, the buffer. The buffer on average is about 40 frames. But, there is always that debate around, how good the buffer is. Is this buffer good enough for this kind of thing and stuff like that? And with the Z6, that debate to me is old and not really relevant because it's a 24 megapixel camera with, a data stream to the card that was made for a 46 megapixel sensor with very fast cards. So the buffer, cleanup time, it's like 3 seconds. On my XH1, I had to, when I filled the buffer with my V60 SD cards, I had to wait something like 10 seconds. On the Z6, if I have to wait more than 4 seconds, it's that I really had like the most uncompressed shots ever. And really, it's not something that I notice at all. When I did some wildlife photography and some sport photography, I was never bothered by the buffer because the card was so fast, it was clearing out or instantly. It's always under 5 seconds whatever you do, like RAW plus JPEG or whatever. And I'm always using like just RAW in this camera. And yeah, it's about like what, 3 seconds, 3.4 seconds as of image resource, which I tend to trust because I can't really measure the the tenths of seconds. So about 3 seconds. But yeah, it's actually very, very, very good. And to me, the buffer discussion about the Z6 is just not really relevant because of that faster card which is in that camera. So that's pretty nice, actually. That's pretty cool. When it comes to autofocus, though, this is a much more important discussion, I think, because the autofocus is the main point of contention about the Z6. This is the thing that people will tell you, oh, but if you use a Z6, you should not really use that camera for anything that's moving or stuff like that. Even on like on photography forums like DP Review, you will have people telling you that. Well, in fact, after using the Z6, I tested the autofocus in the most situations possible, moving subjects, static subjects, backlit subjects, low light, whatever, and I never had any issues with the Z6. Sure, in low light, like very low light, it tends to be a bit little confused, but if you increase, like if you go into non-live exposure mode, like in your viewfinder, you will fix most of the problems that the sensor has when it comes to autofocus. And for backlit subjects, if you go back to single point and do that, you will have no problem at all either. So it's really a matter of, are you knowledgeable enough about your camera to know when to switch modes and when to switch this or this option, rather than just using the camera mindlessly and letting it in full automatic and all subject detection and not really caring about anything else. If you do that, yes, sure, the Z6 is worse than an A7 III or even a Canon EOS R. But if you do use the camera, knowing the camera and what you have in your hands, the camera is actually a brilliant autofocuser and actually much better than what the XH1 was, than what the D700 is even. So it's really a camera that I think is underrated when it comes to autofocus performance, because I've seen a lot of people telling me that I could not shoot like fast-moving subjects like birds in flight or pets or like sports events or even kids with the Z6 because it's not accurate enough. And the fact is that it is accurate enough. Like for my needs, it's much more than accurate enough, which is like the XH1 was already accurate enough, and I had some problems with the XH1 when it comes to lens compatibility and stuff like that, but that's another discussion. But yeah, on the Z6, no problem at all, and I do not see myself needing a camera that is more that is faster or that is more accurate than the Z6. So I know my word doesn't get like a ton of weight or anything like that, but if you want to have a camera that works well, just read the manual, do your testing, and the Z6 will be that camera. That's basically what I have to say. And this was like kind of surprising to me because when I heard about the Z6, when I read forum posts before buying it, I was saying myself, okay, maybe it's like on the same level as the XT2 or something like that. Actually, it turns out to be much better than the XT2, especially in face and eye detection. On the XT2 and XH1, it's an afterthought. It never works. It's not reliable. On the Z6, I can use face and eye detection in this video, no problem. I shot a lot of events with face and eye detection, and I have a way to switch between face and eye and a single point with the press of a button, and that's always super nice to do. Things that I couldn't do on the XT2 or the XH1, which was like always like a little bit of you have to fiddle with your camera a bit when you have a situation that changes, which requires a single point or something like that. So it's always pretty nice to have a camera that is not only smarter but has a better interface doing so. So yeah, to me, autofocus, I have no problem with it. Of course, it's not the best autofocus system around. An A7 III will be better, an A7 IV will be better, the newer Nikons, even the Z6 II, slightly better than the Z6, because it has more focus modes, which are more useful. The ZF and Z8, of course, are much better than the Z6 for speed and accuracy. But those cameras are better, granted, no problem with this. But is the Z6 good enough? To me, it's much more than good enough. So, here you go. Now I want to, just small thing about the autofocus performance. I saw a lot of videos on YouTube talking about the Z6 performance with adapted f-mount lenses. And f-mount lenses, believe it or not, are pretty much all I use with the Z6. I only have the 40mm f2 and the 28mm f2.8, which I mostly use for video. This is the 40mm f2 right now. But for everything else, I use the FTZ2 adapter. And I use it with my 100 to 400, with my 85mm, with my 50mm, and of course with my vintage glass as well. But mostly autofocus f-mount lenses. And the speed and accuracy of those lenses was basically on par with what I was getting on my D700, or even faster sometimes. So to those people, I would say that it's not as good as a DSLR. I would say that it is just as good as a DSLR, and the D700 to me is like a really accurate camera and really fast camera when it comes to autofocus. There hasn't been like a huge upgrade when it comes to speed and accuracy, like mostly for tracking and stuff like that with a D4, D5, D850, sure, but for like speed and accuracy, the D700 was actually pretty damn good. Same thing as the D3, which like was a benchmark for years. So the Z6 outperforms the D700 in that regard, so I wouldn't say that the camera is any slower with FTZ and f-mount lenses. It might be faster with Z-mount lenses simply because the lenses are faster by themselves, But that's completely another subject, and that is not really the point of this video. Okay, let's talk about value, because this is the main point I think about the Z6, the main redeeming quality about the Z6, because otherwise it's basically the same as the other cameras, especially the A7 III. If you look at the pricing of the Z6, so quickly, I bought that one for 720 euros, and it came with 2 backup batteries and an XQD 32GB card, which is my backup card. Now I have a 128 CFX Plus Type B. But if you take in account the price of those like backup batteries and that card, I basically paid the camera for 680 euros or something like that, which is pretty cheap. But if you compare that to a more less scuffed out, because my Z6 is a little bit used, it has 56K shutters when I bought it, and it had like some marks on it. But if you buy a good condition Z6 online on a reputable website like MPB, something like that, you will be able to find it for like 800, 830, something like that. It fluctuates a little bit, but yeah, basically good condition Z6 for about 830, 850 in average. If you want to get an A7 III on the same kind of condition, same website, you will find that those cameras are more like in the 1200 to 1500 range, which is completely nuts. Okay, this is absolutely nuts, considering that those cameras to me are equivalent both in performance, image quality, and the Z6 even has some nice bonuses over the A7 III, like the displays, the ergonomics, the handling, the external video, which is much better than what you have on the A7 III, for example. So there is like legit advantages to getting a Z6. There is also advantages to getting an A7 III, but not enough advantages, in my opinion, to justify the price difference, which is between 50 to 100% markup over what the Z6 costs. So this is really what makes the value and the, what makes the Z6 an attractive camera, is that you still have a very up-to-date sensor. Even the ZF, which was released this year, has basically the same sensor in it, and everybody's saying that this sensor is still very good. So you have a modern performance for the sensor, you have pretty modern performance for the autofocus, you have good video, exceptional external video, you have a lot of things with the Z6, and the price doesn't seem to reflect the performance of the camera. I think it's mostly due to that reputation that the Z6 has compared to the A7 III, which was like a paradigm shift of the camera market at the time. But yeah, it's really something that I think plays in the favor of the Z6. There is not a lot of demand for that camera because of that 2018 reputation. But yeah, the firmware updates really fixed the camera tremendously. I picked the camera when it was already fixed, so I can't really say about how much it has improved the camera, but I know the 1.0 firmware was really bad. And the 2.0 and 3.0 firmware were huge upgrades according to the videos that were released when those firmware updates dropped. And so the word of mouth that the camera has been substantially increased, I feel like hasn't been really around, and that people still consider the Z6 to be a shit camera, which is, to me, nonsense. So, yeah. Now, if we compare to other cameras on the market that would be competitors to the Z6, there is, of course, the EOS R, the Canon EOS R, which is the camera that Canon released about the same time as Nikon released the Z6. It was about the same price, and it's still about the same price as the Z6. It's like $800 to $900, so pretty much equivalent to what the Z6 costs. It has a little bit more resolution, but it's using an older sensor which has less dynamic range and more noise. So you have to do a trade-off here. But beyond that, the ergonomics of the camera to me are worse. You don't have an autofocus joystick, you don't have the wheel in the back that you generally have with Canon bodies. You have that weird touch bar, which is why. The grip is better, but it's like the Canon inverted wave thing with the button in front and down on top. I do prefer the button on top and down on the front. That's just a personal thing, though. And you have no IBIS. And you have a super huge crop in 4K, because the processor was old as well. So, when it comes to value and features and stuff like that, to me, this is no-brainer. The Z6 is a better value than the Canon EOS R. Like, no questions asked. There is also the Panasonic Lumix S5, and the S5, in a lot of ways, is very similar to the A7 III. Both cameras have the same EVF, back panels, same storage format. Oh yeah, I didn't say that the EOS R only has a single card slot, and it's an SD. So if I want to choose between cameras that have a single card slot, I do prefer to have a CF Express Type B for the reasons I explained earlier in the video, but here you go. So back on the Lumix S5, it has the same dual card slot as the A7 III, so one UHS-2, one UHS-1 for some reason. You have the same back panels, it shoots slower than both the Z6 and the A7 III, so only does 7 frames per second, and you have basically the same sensor performance. But you have considerably better internal video, because it can shoot 10-bit internal, which neither the Z6 or the A7 III can do. But the price for that is that you will have a contrast detection only autofocus system, which is I'm not sure I would recommend it, really. It's not that bad, but for like fast-moving subjects, I wouldn't say that it's a really good autofocus system. For something that moves a little bit, not too fast, it works. For autofocus single, it's blazing fast, really. It's really good. But for autofocus continuous, I would actually try to get a camera with phase detection autofocus, so either the A7 III or the Z6. And price-wise, the S5 is a little more expensive than the Z6, so unless you do a lot of video and you really want that 10-bit video internal, don't want to pay for a recorder at all or whatever, I would like to recommend the Z6 instead of the S5, unless you do that kind of video stuff. So to me, when you look at the landscape of cameras there is, like in that full frame mirrorless cameras, around that $1,000 mark, to me the Z6 is the best value out of all of them. Now if you compare to APS-C cameras or Micro Four Thirds cameras, that might be a totally different subject, but then we're talking about less dynamic range, lower ISO, like lower high ISO noise performance and stuff like that. There is other compromises to do, and I'm not gonna enter that debate right now. So if you want to do your research to see if an XT4 is a better buy than the Z6, for example, do so. But I'm not going to talk about this in this video. So in conclusion, I initially bought the Z6 because I really wanted to have that Nikon F-man compatibility with the FTZ. If you want to know more about that, go watch my somewhere here my Fujifilm to Nikon switch video that I made back in February. But I really wanted to have that compatibility, and it was kind of a blind shot, I would say. I handled the Z6 a few times in a store before, but I wasn't really aware of the performance, and regardless of what performance it had, I would have bought it. I kept the XH1 as a backup, like, okay, it's not working, I'm switching back to the XH1, but after like 2 weeks, I sold the XH1 because I knew I would go forward with the Z6. So yeah, that's pretty much where we're at right now. I've had the camera for 6 months. It has never let me down a single time in these last 6 months. And I really do think that there's not a lot of things that I would want more than what the Z6 has already. And when it comes to autofocus, image quality, ergonomics, lens compatibility and stuff like that, there's not a lot of things that even the newer Nikons would give me. Like, yeah, sure, the Z8 is a great camera, but the Z8 is $4,000. I'm not spending that much on a camera. The ZF is cool, but the ZF has no ergonomics to speak of, and I like my good grips. Stuff like that. And one thing that I'm telling myself is, if I upgrade this camera in like the next 5 years, I'm an idiot, because this is clearly all I need for all of the photography and videography I do. And it has a lot of potential to go above what I'm currently able to do, period. So I don't really need more than what the Z6 can do. And, I was already saying this for the XT2 and the XH1, and I do feel a bit dumb about it. But the truth is that, like, the XT2 and the XH1 both had, like, some compromises, some flaws that annoyed the shit out of me within like a few months, and I've had nothing of that sort yet with the Z6. I don't think it will happen now, because I pretty much know the camera inside and out right now. I've been shooting almost exclusively with that camera, even though I have like 12 other cameras sitting around. I recently bought like a D2X or something like that for a couple of bucks, and I haven't shot with that camera yet, simply because I've been shooting with the Z6 ever since I got it, pretty much. So, yeah, I think I'm not going to drag this video for too long. I think it's like plenty long already. I'm just going to say that the Z6 is a very good value camera for me, and I don't see myself upgrading anytime soon. But with that being said, I'll see you in the next one. See you guys.